What are the stages of service delivery? What's the service cycle, a complete cycle of a transaction? We've got this simple pattern here to help us explore what happens in services and service delivery. It's actually the same kind of pattern as in the 5-element sequence that we've seen elsewhere, but there's more detail here, more subsections within the completions phase. So here's the overall pattern. Each step of the pattern is supported by distinct services: marketing, sales, delivery, accounts, customer service, and so on. The first step is that we look at shared purpose. We establish a common enterprise, a common story, the context, a kind of shared reason to connect and interact with each other at all. The next one is that we start to make a connection, often a personal connection, but we also narrow it down to a scope for action and the beginnings of some kind of policies around which any kind of transaction will be built. The kind of personal questions of who are you, do we trust each other enough to proceed, actually applies to both human and machine alike. The next step is we agree on a plan for action. We build up a conversation but also a contract. This settles the details of what will be exchanged in each direction: information, services, products, payments, whatever. We then set up the transaction itself. This is going to be the content for the transaction or interaction, and that depends on all of the previous stages. It's really important that we don't over-focus on this stage. We then actually do the delivery of product or service. Now this is what we would map out in the fine detail of conventional process modelling, but notice that it's always in context with everything that's happened before. We now come to the completions, and each one of these wraps back and matches back to the previous step. So there's several sub-stages here, of which the first is just simply to ensure that there's an actual end point to the delivery of the service or product. We now complete for the perspective of the provider. We complete the contract. In a commercial context, this typically occurs when the customer or consumer pays for the service, pays the supplier or the provider. The next step is that we complete from the other side of the story. We're completing the relationship, making sure that the relationship is sorted out. And again, the completion here may often occur sometime after the completion of the action itself. For example, bought food is eaten. And finally, we can complete from the perspective of the story, the shared purpose, the enterprise. For long-term viability, all of these interactions must be seen as fair and balanced, not just by the transactors, but by all of the players in that shared space. So far this has been a little bit abstract, so let's make it come alive, and we add the human dimension with some simple minifigures. So a simple transaction example: we've got a service provider on one side, a service consumer on the other. The first part of this is we establish an initial connection. Typically this is done by reputation or brand, but we build a connection that's about the broader story, the promises that we each make to the story itself. We then establish a kind of personal connection, which also provides basis for the rules for the interaction. We're also narrowing downward from the big picture to a more specific scope for action. We then start working on something like a contract. We specify and agree the details of what the agreement will be about what's going to happen. And we often typically do this with a literal handshake. We now do the setup for the transaction itself. We take action to make the agreed plan happen. And we then get the transaction to happen. But notice that the people who do the work, who actually deliver it, the actors, who may be human or machine, in this case humans, the ones who do the actual work may not be the ones who are specifying the interaction. We're then going to establish that the work is complete. We've completed the terms of the contract. Typically we're going to now involve someone like an accounts department to deliver the services for the support services for completion. And notice too that the completions may be different for each of the players. So for example here, the customer has got to satisfy their customer, the customer's customer. And it's always about the whole enterprise, satisfying those that support the whole story. It's always about the overall shared story, not just the promises made to each other, but tying to the story itself. And every stakeholder is watching. Every stakeholder in that story. There's a previous video we talked about the hollow map, about how to identify the full set of stakeholders. This really matters here. Now, a really important warning: don't try to shortcut that sequence or cycle. There's a very common broken version of the cycle which we call the quick profit cycle. You grab a contract, you transact, you complete, you grab the next contract, you transact, you complete, and you lose the purpose, the connection with people, the connection to the story, you lose the connection to values, to trust, to policies. It all falls apart, all of a sudden, without any apparent warning. So here's the quick profit trap. Literally, we go from to contract, to transaction, to doing it, to completing, to getting satisfied from the provider's perspective only, and ignore everyone else. Now, this looks like it gets better results in the short term by focusing only on our needs, but doing so, we greatly risk long-term viability. So if we focus only on self and on ignoring others' outcomes, we will awaken very angry regulators. We will get hit quite hard, and apparently without warning. And remember, all of this is in full view of all stakeholders. So it's a really quick, this quick profit cycle is a really quick way to create a lot of anti-clients, of people who are committed against our organisation. And remember, everyone is watching. So overall, that's the cycle that occurs every time we do a service delivery or transaction for products or services. That's the overall pattern. That's the service cycle. Use this to help us look at how our interactions and transactions work. Thanks for watching. Do look at the YouTube description for links to further detail. And don't forget to subscribe for other videos, and also to support us on Patreon to help us produce these videos and the tools themselves.